Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel and stay updated on more historical stories. The fate of those who survived. Prologue. Survival as a lifelong sentence. History often marks survival as a victory. In official timelines, it is a clean line. Before, persecution, deportation, starvation, extermination. After, liberation, peace, rebuilding. But for those who survived ghettos, labor camps, and extermination centers, survival was never a conclusion. It was a sentence, one that extended far beyond the war, shaping every relationship, every memory, and every silence that followed. To survive was not merely to remain alive. It was to carry forward what others could not. It was to wake each day with memories that did not belong to the present, to inhabit a body that had been broken and reshaped by hunger and fear, and to exist in a world that often wanted to forget what survivors could never escape. This is not a story about death camps alone. It is a story about life afterward, about the cost of survival, the burden of memory, and the fragile act of rebuilding a human existence after systematic dehumanization. Liberation. When freedom arrived too late for many, liberation did not arrive as a celebration. When Allied forces entered camps such as Auschwitz-Birkenau, Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen, they encountered scenes that defied military logic. These were not prisoners of war. They were human remnants, starving, diseased, skeletal figures living among corpses. For many survivors, liberation was physically incomprehensible. Their bodies were so depleted that even sitting upright caused dizziness. Some were unable to walk. Others died within days of being freed, their organs unable to process nourishment after prolonged starvation. Doctors faced a medical crisis unlike any seen before. There were no established protocols for treating people who had lived for years on near-zero caloric intake. Psychologically, liberation brought confusion rather than clarity. Survivors had learned that hope was dangerous. Many feared that the soldiers were another deception, another prelude to violence. Some had witnessed false liberations before, moments of relief that ended in beatings or executions. Freedom arrived, but it did not immediately feel real. Bodies that remembered everything. The physical legacy of the camps did not fade with time. Survivors carried chronic illnesses for decades. Weakened immune systems, digestive disorders, permanent joint damage, heart conditions, and untreated injuries that never healed properly. Many women suffered reproductive damage due to starvation, forced labor, or medical experimentation. Men often lived with chronic pain from years of physical abuse. Medical experiments conducted in camps left survivors with lifelong disabilities. Others bore scars from beatings, surgeries without anesthesia, or industrial accidents caused by exhaustion. These injuries were daily reminders that survival came at a cost. Even those who appeared physically recovered often lived with bodies that remembered hunger. Many survivors developed disordered eating habits, hoarding food, eating rapidly, or experiencing anxiety when meals were delayed. Hunger had rewired their instincts. The body survived, but it never forgot. Psychological survival. Trauma without language. In the years immediately following the war, there was no common vocabulary for trauma. Survivors were not diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. They were expected to move on. The assumption was that once danger had passed, the mind would heal on its own. This assumption was wrong. Survivors experienced recurring nightmares, intrusive memories, emotional numbness, and sudden panic triggered by ordinary sounds or smells. A barking dog could recall guard dogs. A striped fabric could evoke camp uniforms. The past intruded without warning. Many suffered from survivor's guilt, a relentless question that had no answer. Why me? Why did one child live when thousands died? Why did one transport arrive late while another went straight to the gas chambers? Survival often felt arbitrary, and this randomness tormented those who lived. Some survivors turned inward, withdrawing emotionally from others. Others struggled with uncontrollable anger or despair. Suicide rates among survivors were significantly higher than among the general population in the decades following the war. And yet most survivors never sought help. Therapy was rare, stigma was strong, and many believed their pain was simply the price of being alive. Returning home. The shock of absence. For survivors who attempted to return to their hometowns, the journey was often more painful than exile. Entire Jewish quarters had vanished. Synagogues were destroyed or repurposed. Cemeteries were desecrated. Homes were occupied by strangers who did not welcome their former owners. In Eastern Europe, anti-Semitism persisted long after the war. Survivors were sometimes accused of exaggerating their suffering or exploiting their victimhood. In extreme cases, they were attacked or murdered. The realization was devastating. Liberation had not erased hatred. The most painful discovery, however, was the absence of family. Survivors searched for names on lists, visited former neighbors, and wrote letters that were never answered. Slowly, the truth emerged. Parents, siblings, spouses, children, gone. For many, this loss was harder to bear than the camps themselves. In the camps, survival had required emotional numbness. After the war, grief had no such protection. Displaced persons, living between past and future, millions of survivors became stateless. They had no legal citizenship, no recognized home, and no immediate destination. Allied authorities established displaced persons camps across Europe, intended as temporary solutions. For many, they became semi-permanent homes. Life in DP camps was marked by contradiction. Survivors were free, yet confined. They were safe, yet uncertain. Barbed wire still surrounded many camps, triggering memories of imprisonment. Despite this, DP camps became places of remarkable resilience. Survivors organized schools to educate children who had missed years of learning. Newspapers were printed in multiple languages. Theaters staged performances. Political movements formed. Religious life was revived. Marriage rates were high. So were birth rates. Children born in DP camps symbolized defiance, a refusal to allow genocide to be the final word. Yet beneath this activity lay constant anxiety. Emigration papers were delayed. Immigration quotas were strict. The future remained fragile. Emigration and the search for belonging. For many survivors, leaving Europe was the only way forward. The United States, Canada, Australia, and parts of South America accepted refugees, though often reluctantly. Survivors waited years for visas, undergoing interviews that required them to recount trauma repeatedly. The founding of Israel marked a turning point. For Jewish survivors, it offered not only refuge but agency, the chance to participate in building a state rather than begging for acceptance. Yet emigration brought new challenges. Survivors arrived in unfamiliar cultures, often without language skills or professional credentials. Many were forced into manual labor despite having been doctors, teachers, or artists before the war. Isolation was common. Neighbors could not understand their past. Survivors learned to adapt outwardly while carrying an inner world that remained untouched by their new surroundings. Love, marriage, and the weight of memory. Forming intimate relationships after the war was complex. Survivors sought connection, but intimacy also required vulnerability, something the camps had punished. Many married fellow survivors, believing only those who had endured similar suffering could understand them. These marriages were often intense, built on shared loss as much as affection. Parenthood brought both healing and fear. Survivors loved their children fiercely, sometimes obsessively. The terror of loss never disappeared. Some parents avoided discussing the past, hoping to protect their children. Others felt compelled to teach them everything, fearing that forgetting would be another form of death. Children of survivors grew up in households shaped by silence or sorrow. Many later described feeling responsible for their parents' emotional survival, a burden passed across generations. justice delayed and often denied. The promise of justice was limited. While the Nuremberg trials prosecuted high-ranking officials, most perpetrators were never tried. Many reintegrated into post-war society, sometimes living near their former victims. For survivors, this lack of accountability was devastating. It reinforced the sense that the world valued order over truth, stability over justice. Testifying was an act of courage. Survivors were asked to recall precise details of experiences designed to erase individuality. Many felt re-traumatized by legal systems that demanded evidence for crimes that defied comprehension. Yet testimony mattered. It preserved truth in a world tempted by denial. Bearing witness, memory as responsibility. As decades passed, survivors increasingly became educators and witnesses. They spoke in schools, universities, and public forums. They recorded testimonies for archives. They wrote memoirs not for fame, but for necessity. Memory became both a duty and a burden. Survivors feared that once they were gone, denial would flourish. At the same time, repeated retelling reopened wounds. There was no single way to survive survival. Some spoke loudly, others remembered quietly. Both choices were acts of resistance. Aging survivors and the return of the past. Old age often intensified trauma. Retirement removed distractions. Illness weakened defenses. Memories resurfaced with renewed force. Many elderly survivors lived alone, having lost spouses and siblings. Poverty affected a significant number. Despite public ceremonies and memorial days, daily life could be lonely and difficult. Yet even in their final years, many survivors continued to speak. They understood that time was running out, not only for them, but for living memory itself. Epilogue: What survival means. The fate of those who survived cannot be reduced to resilience alone. Survival was not heroic by choice, it was often accidental. It did not erase pain, nor did it guarantee peace. Survivors rebuilt lives in the shadow of loss. They carried memories when forgetting might have been easier. They taught the world that survival is not a moment, but a lifelong negotiation between past and present. Their fate challenges us not only to remember what happened, but to understand what came after. Because the true measure of survival is not simply living through history's darkest chapter, but living with it every day that follows.